Welcome to Chemo Coffee Talk, your weekly dose of resilience, inspiration, and a whole lot of heart. I'm Carly Fouth, a triple-negative breast cancer survivor who started this podcast right from my chemo chair, and now I'm coming to you straight from my kitchen. Whether you're fighting the fight yourself, supporting a loved one, or just here for a little encouragement, you're in the right place. Every week, we'll chat with my cancer-fighting buddies, caregivers, and experts, sharing stories that are real, raw, and uplifting. So grab your favorite mug, brew up some resilience, and let's dive into a conversation filled with humor, hope, and the unstoppable human spirit. I'm committed to continuing this podcast to reach and help as many people as possible. And any kind of support makes a huge difference. So subscribe and share it with friends. Your support keeps me going and helps me spread hope even further. Thanks for listening. Welcome to another episode of Chemo Coffee Talk. Once again, I am very excited to have my guest today join me. It is Kelley Tuthill. She's a former broadcast journalist for WCVB, which is how I got to know her, and many of you probably have got to know her. But she's a breast cancer survivor, and now she is CEO of Catholic Charities. So I'm really excited to have Kelley here to talk about her breast cancer journey and what her journey has been like coming from a journalist at WCVB and then taking the experience she had with breast cancer and kind of making lemonade out of lemons, which is something I love to talk to people about. So Kelley, welcome to Chemo Coffee Talk.
Thanks for having me. And I'm glad to know that you're doing well. And I think it's so great to see that you're taking something that, in the past, people didn't even want to talk about and making it really accessible to a lot of folks. And, there's people out there that feel less alone because of what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that. And before I hit record, I was telling Kelley, I remember when Kelley was open enough about her, being generous enough to be open about her diagnosis with breast cancer as a journalist. I get very attached to my journalists, because I feel like when you are watching the news every day, it almost feels like that person is part of your experience. So ever since I was a little kid growing up in New Jersey, I got very attached to my eyewitness news team. It was this bond and this sensitivity I felt when you announced your diagnosis. And I think it's really interesting because I was thinking to myself, how in the world is she dealing with such a devastating diagnosis? And I was concerned for you. And little did I know that years down the road, I would be facing the same diagnosis. And I just think it's interesting because life does go on. You get the diagnosis and then you do what you can with it and you keep going. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about your experience as a journalist and how did that experience influence your approach to advocating for breast cancer awareness and support?
So I was diagnosed 18 years ago, almost to the day. It was December 22nd, 2006. And at the time, I had a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old baby. So it wasn't exactly a convenient time. Not that there's ever a good time to be diagnosed with cancer, but it was a Friday before Christmas. And the news was really unexpected because I had no family history of breast cancer. Of course, I've learned now that, most people don't have a family history of breast cancer, but I didn't know that. I thought it was something other people got. I definitely thought it was something older people got. I was 36 years old. It was not something, we worry about so many things, particularly when we have young children. There's a long list of things you worry about. This was not something I worried about at all. But the biggest risk factor for breast cancer is just being a woman. Mm-hmm. We know that. And of course, the risk gets higher the older you get, but it's really not, it's in my family. It's really, I'm a woman. So that means I'm more likely to get breast cancer. Even if I'm a triathlete or even if I only eat vegan, whatever it is, unfortunately, cancer doesn't seem to necessarily care, though I don't want to discourage anyone from eating well. That does help, but exercising. I always say it was the price I paid for too many, Burger Kings in my 20s, but we don't know, right?
Yeah, we don't know.
It's a combination of things. When I was diagnosed, I was a news reporter. I think for many of us, right, if we can, we try to continue having some sort of normalcy in our life. So for me, it was working. And so maybe the easiest thing would have been to take a long leave, deal with the cancer, take care of the kids. I couldn't get there. So what do I do with this? And so to be very public with the breast cancer just felt like, well, I'm a journalist. So why wouldn't I do that? And so I had cameras, and this is, still in the nascent age of, I don't think Instagram or any of that was around, but we had websites. And so we had blogs and that sort of things and video, right? I was a news reporter. So we had cameras. There was cameras in when I had a mastectomy. There was cameras when I was in getting chemotherapy and radiation. They followed me everywhere. And I think trying to demystify what it was all about and how you can still find joy, how you can still have a meaningful life despite this kind of health challenge, what kind of support is helpful and maybe what's not helpful. Those are kind of some of the topics I tried to cover as a journalist covering the story I never thought I would need to.
What was the response? And maybe I could take it back a little further. Let's first start with when you made the decision to be open about it. Like we talked about, this was some years ago. Things are a little different now. Was that a difficult decision for you to make, like talking with your family about it? And then what was the response that you got from people when you decided to be so open?
Frankly, Carly, it wasn't a difficult decision for me, but that's how I'm wired. I recognized at some point maybe I didn't quite go through it enough with my husband and, but he was fine. He knew what he was marrying into, and he kind of goes flow on all the crazy that I bring to our lives. My plastic surgeon was definitely caught off guard that there would be a camera in there. So again, when I was telling people, it's just not how he's used to doing surgery. He came, he came along, but he was definitely caught off guard. I think the station got kind of protective, like, are you sure about this? They didn't want to be seen in a position, and I respect that, of like exploiting my crisis for eyeballs on a TV. And I think we all quickly realized by the response that it was 100% the right thing to do. The response was sort of immediate and overwhelming. Once it was on CBB, then CNN wanted to do something, and Good Morning America. And that was, unbelievably, Robin Roberts did the interview. So
amazing.
Lovely. One of those people that afterward then said, wait, I want to talk to you. I want to send you my prayers and all that stuff. And then she would be diagnosed, afterwards. It was just... it was insane. And one of my dear friends from my Notre Dame life where I went to college, she had been diagnosed a few months ahead of me, but kept it private. Totally different take on it because her tumor was so big. She told me later she was sure she was going to die. So what was the point of telling her she wanted to live as normally as she could until she died of breast cancer? Well, of course, she's not dead. She just lived with it just 6 months longer than I have. So she'll be coming up on 19 years in March. But she came out of her little cancer closet to support me and said, I want you to know, what's happening. So it immediately became clear that one of the things that was important about being public about it was this community that we're tapping into, that you're a part of now. Reluctantly, I know you wish you weren't, but we recognize that one-on-one we're doing this. Like, here's what I want to tell you, make sure you have a shirt you can open, after you get home from the hospital, because you've got to have these drains. And, when you go for radiation, you're like this, just be aware of that. It's kind of weird, whatever it is that we tell each other, or your head's going to be cold, so make sure you have a hat to sleep in. We hand it to each other. I just tried to do it on a much larger scale because I had the platform. So I thought it would be ridiculous if I didn't use it to help other people.
I love that. And I think that's something you and I have in common, me on a much smaller scale. But I went into Dana-Farber and didn't ask anyone's permission to do the podcast from my chemo chair. And I didn't talk about it with anyone. And I kind of thought, well, if I ask, I might get a no. And I'd rather kind of show them what a good idea this is to kind of normalize cancer. And then they can tell me to stop. But at least I can put it in front of their face and be like, this is something new. This is a little crazy. And like you said, my family is used to my crazy too. And I just really feel like it has been such a good thing. And you did that way back when it wasn't before social media, before people were sharing. So you were kind of like a groundbreaker. And I thank you for doing that, because I think by you doing what you did helped me give permission to myself on a much smaller scale to do what I did. So thank you. I think a lot of people probably feel that way from watching you as well. So now you were a journalist. You were really open about your breast cancer journey. I can't really remember the timeline of when you left WCVB and then you transitioned from obviously being a broadcaster to leadership roles in nonprofit organizations. What was that transition like for you? And tell us a little bit about how your breast cancer journey may or may not have affected that decision.
Sure. So it actually was 10 years after I was first diagnosed. Okay. So I left Channel 5 in 2016. And I think the important thing is, don't make rash decisions when you're either in treatment or immediately after treatment, in my opinion, right? That's just my opinion. I mean, say yes more than you say no. But then again, use the cancer as an excuse if you want to get out of something. I mean, and let's hope you're ever going to have to use it. But it's a great excuse to get out of stuff. You just really, you can draw the line and set boundaries. And it's a great excuse to do that. We should all do it anyway. But I think making a really rash decision, right, particularly when you're done with treatment and you're feeling, most of us, because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, feel really down when treatment's over. It can be just a low point. It's inexplicable. You think you'd be like celebrating and let's, go on, let's go to Disney. Instead, you're like, "Look, I can't stop crying. And I feel really down and I feel really scared because now they stopped the treatment. So then that means the cancer could come back." And you start then getting, I shouldn't generalize. I started getting obsessed. Like I couldn't read obituaries because I would want to know, well, what type did they have? And did they get the treatment I got? And if so, why did it work? And so it's kind of a dark period. So I don't think making a big life change, that's the good time. Like let yourself come back on the upswing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're footing again, it's like, it's just a little, your center of gravity gets really off.
Yeah.
When you unexpectedly lose what you thought was your absolute, guarantee of good health, as particularly if you're younger, I wasn't expecting this. So you're really a lot kilter. Don't make any major, don't operate any heavy machinery, as they say. Kind of get past it. So then I started to think, like, what do I want to do with my life? This was an incredible run. It's almost, 20 plus years overall in broadcast journalism. I saw a lot, highs and lows, right? It's a lot of sad news. I felt like I accomplished a lot with doing this series and being an advocate for women. And so I just started to think, well, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And it was starting to become clear I didn't think I did. And I thought maybe there was other things that I could accomplish in my life or contribute to. So I just thought, well, what makes sense? So of course I thought about healthcare, right? Do I want to go work in a hospital or some kind of healthcare setting? I thought about universities and ultimately did take a university job. But it was about how can I impact people's lives in a positive way? What's the avenue for that? Or nonprofit. Like those are sort of the three things that were in my mind. And so an opportunity came to work at Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. So I took that job and it was a great right out of, a long career. It's really hard to change gears, right? There's a lot of fear there. Well, one, you have to convince people you're capable, whether or not you've taken a period off because of illness or because of having children or whatever reason. If you take that gap, then you're thinking, all right, how do I market myself? Like, what's the resume look like? And I think it's really important, no matter what your trajectory looks like, is to focus on skills. Because if you think that you're going to wow them with, well, I was the best, at insert, right? PTA, because that's what you spent your time on, or nonprofit work, or whatever it is, or just a different field, they may not make that connection. They may not be able to see how what you did that you thought was like amazing in one area translates to what they need. So be hyper-focused on what the hiring person needs and figure out how to tailor your story into fitting that the best you can, right? Because if you're not a perfect fit, you don't have the 5 to 10 years of this or this degree or that. How can you convince them that the skills are transferable? You have to be focused on them, not you. It's a different mindset. You're there to solve their problem, not them help you with your midlife crisis.
Right.
So,
that's a great tip.
A lot of people get it wrong. And now need an organization. I'm always trying to say, like, I'm the one who's posted the job. You're trying to fit the position I need. I'm not supposed to be contorting myself to fit your needs. Just saying. And we've been in a tough labor market for people like me in the last couple of years. It's been a employee market. I still think there's usually competition for most jobs. If you want to be successful, you got to really be thinking about what the employer needs and how you can meet it. Don't start with, and I'll only work from home, or I'll only do this, or at 3 o'clock I need to go do that. Like, you really have to be thinking those things may come. Make them fall in love with you first.
Yes.
Go through your list of things that would be nice.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip, I think, for anyone looking for a job, even if you haven't somebody just coming out of school or anyone at any time of their life. It's less about you and more about you helping the company or whoever it is you're applying for. And that's a skill too. It's hard for people to think like that, I think.
Yes, we, in a variety of ways, become kind of caught up in ourselves.
Yes.
And so I just think it's thinking about that. And then once you become valuable, I think most of us as managers, as people who lead teams, we want to keep our people and we want them to be happy. So I think we're more than willing to work with them and to try to adjust and all that stuff. But I think you start out by being valuable to the organization. And then I think that kind of flexibility often can come your way depending on the organization. But it'd be nice if you kind of go into it with this, we all want to make a contribution to the greater good of the organization.
Yeah.
Versus this is what I need.
Was it hard for you to make that transition from being a journalist, or do you feel like you had that in your personality to be a leader of a nonprofit? Was that tough for you to?
100%. I never had an Outlook calendar. I never, I was a journalist. I came in, We talked about what was going on, and then they sent me out to go cover it. I didn't have an Outlook calendar. I didn't even know how to use one. I didn't, we used email, of course, but I didn't live on a calendar, except for maybe with the kids and my personal life. But at work, no, it was like chaos. And you just did what was the next thing and all that. So I really didn't understand that. I didn't understand when you wanted to talk to someone, you had to put a meeting invite out. And that's how you engaged with somebody who's one office over. Like, I didn't know any of the rules of the road. And so I had to learn kind of how the culture worked. So no, it was a steep learning curve. And what are words like leverage and, all these things people say in the workplace, and I'm like, what? Strategic planning and like all this stuff. I'm like, so I had to learn a lot. I mean, I did a lot of like online courses and like certificate programs. Like if some opportunity came up for training, I would always take it because I just wanted to keep learning. When I was at Regis, I decided to get my doctorate. They had a program there. I was an employee. I applied for it, and I did it. It was a part-time doctoral program because I could. And I think learning is keeping your brain sharp and growing. And again, it shows a willingness to your employer, like, I'm willing to invest the time to be better, to be sharper, to be, a better employee and to make bigger contributions and to grow, right? It was, obviously ambition and dedication. And so, no, I did not feel very well prepared for the real world, but I figured it out.
I'm curious if you think that your journey with breast cancer, do you think that helped you make the transition that you made, being that you had no experience from you were a journalist, that's what you did. And then you recreated this life for yourself, this professional life for yourself. Do you think, and I'm always thinking of like, what's the silver lining of breast cancer? Or you always have a choice to look at something negative in your life, look how it gave you a lesson or it taught you something. Do you think you would have been able to make that transition or had the courage to make that transition if you hadn't gone through something like breast cancer?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Carly. I mean, I think one is going through cancer treatment, right? You give up, in some cases, more than a year. In my case, it was about a year, a little bit more, with the Herceptin for that extra bonus 6 months. You give up a lot of time. So you start to think about in the future, if I'm lucky enough to get more time, because you start to recognize that, no, nothing's guaranteed, even if you might have thought it was. If I'm lucky enough to have time, how do I want to spend it? With whom? Mm-hmm. What do I want to do? What's my purpose? What do I want out of life? And what do I want to contribute to others? So I think it gives you time to do that. And then you feel compelled to sort of act on it. But as I said, I don't think you need to act on it immediately. You want to make sure it's not just a passing feeling. And you blow up your life for nothing. And then, I think it does give you courage, right? If you face that, right? I mean, can you get the hot towels because there's no more veins? Can you, is this radiation going to be worse than the cancer? Well, we've got to go after it. Like all these questions, 10 years, tamoxifen, okay. All the things that you deal with cancer, the post-treatment scans, right? Where you're going to literally have a heart attack until they come and tell you what they saw or didn't see in your scans. If you can face all that, a career change seems sort of minor in comparison, mm-hmm. right? In terms of the fear, courage ratio that it requires. Getting courage. I guess the only other thing I would say is in a cancer treatment, if you're lucky enough, and I certainly was, you recognize the power of your community, right? Your people, mm-hmm. and that might mean people you didn't know before that have stepped forth and they want to be your people and they want to step in and support you. And you realize if you really want to get something, get ahead, move towards something, build something, chances are you're not going to do it alone. They're usually not solitary quests. You might have to go to somebody for advice on this, or you might need funders if you're trying to build something. There's a million reasons you might need somebody to make a call for you, because I know I could get that job if I could just make sure they see my resume. Can you make sure Bob makes a call to Sally and Sally looks at my resume, whatever it is. So you recognize the power of community and in breast cancer. I mean, I would have never gotten through that year if it weren't for so many people, whether it's in the beginning and someone says, you really ought to talk to this doctor. I hear they're the best. Let me see if I can get you in. Or if it's like, can we come over and cheer you up? Or, friends that said, I'll come to chemo, whatever different ways people say that they will support you, including, getting involved in philanthropy and supporting the greater breast cancer effort. Like that was from friends. That was good peer pressure. So, where someone says, well, I am doing something. You want to come join this effort? And you go, all right, yeah, that sounds good. And it gives you a little bit of a purpose at a time that you're feeling kind of like lost.
So, and this is not a question that I sent you ahead of time, but I just thought of this as we were talking. So I think there's you and I, and again, me on a smaller level than you, but we kind of had a platform so we could take our journey and do something with it. And yours was your job and me was kind of just having a following with clients and social media. But I know that it still was very scary, being that I had just started my business and taken the leap to make it official. And then I got this diagnosis of breast cancer. And as a fitness instructor, it's probably the worst job you can have, going into breast cancer when you're working by yourself and for yourself. What is one tip that you could give somebody who may be listening today who just received a diagnosis of breast cancer and they are in a position where they need to work, or they're just panicked over, what do I do now with this diagnosis? How am I going to put food on the table for my family? Or how am I going to keep going in my career? What's one tip that you have for them, or maybe a little nugget of inspiration to help get them through those feelings and that experience?
Yeah. Well, obviously everybody's experience is different, right? And somebody that's going to have a true financial hardship, I mean, that's so difficult. So there's levels of impact to people, from I don't have the energy to work to I have to work. So I recognize that there's no simple way to do it. I think one is that I think universal is the diagnosis piece itself is absolutely overwhelming, right? When someone tells you you have breast cancer and your head is just spinning, that I think it's to recognize that's a completely normal reaction. If you don't understand what they're telling you and talking about, again, a completely normal reaction. Most of us have no idea what they're talking about when they start talking about tumor sizes and types of cancer and all these things. It's really overwhelming. So one, just catch your breath. In most cases, you have enough time to gather the information you need to approach it, in a really organized, thoughtful way. So again, sometimes you go in and then they put you with someone and then they put a date on a calendar. Like, take a breath. I'm a huge advocate of second opinions for just that reason. And that even if you go with plan A, right, and they booked a surgery and that's the date and it stays the date, that's awesome. In the meantime, by getting a second opinion, you just at least understand more about your cancer. Even if they say the exact same thing, you just might hear it better the second time because you're not in absolute panic shock. So I just think just usually you have enough time to get a little control. And I think that initial diagnosis to when you have a plan, the plan feels a lot better, even though the diagnosis is the same. Might even be worse in the time, since they might tell you there's more lymph nodes or something that's worse. But somehow having a plan and knowing, okay, if I do this, then this will happen, I think helps a lot to get it. And I think understanding that even that can change. And I always tell people, like, if you're going to go in for a lumpectomy, you need to be prepared. They might not get it all the first time.
Yes.
I don't know why they don't tell people this, or
I don't either.
To think that maybe they do tell them, but nobody listens. I don't know. It's probably a combination of both. But understanding, and again, they may tell you they think there's no lymph nodes, but then there's lymph nodes, or they think there's lymph nodes, but guess what? There's no lymph. It can change so much. Or this looks like that, but it ends up being this. It's just, it can change. And so what my dear friend, who was a doctor, told me at the time was try not to get too excited about the things you perceive to be good and too down on the things you perceive to be bad. Because again, like, I had HER2 positive cancer. Geez, if you Googled it, you think it was aggressive, it's young people, it's this. Well, Herceptin has made that very survivable. So yes, if I'd gotten that cancer in the early 2000s before there was Herceptin, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And that's really stark to consider. But there's Herceptin. So that's tough. And even triple negative, people will Google it, and Robin Roberts had triple negative. Joan London had triple negative. So yes, it can be more challenging to treat because there's not specific treatments for that, but it's not a guarantee that you will have a recurrence of your cancer if you get triple negative. We've seen, like I said, both of those two very high profile, women have told me that's the kind they had and they are fine. So it's not necessarily, it's a more challenging cancer. That's a fact, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. You can't control the cards you got. What you can control is how you play them, how you live your life the best you can for as long as you can. That's what you can control.
Yeah, I like that advice.
Right?
And I really like that you talk about, like, once you have a plan, it feels more manageable. So I think, like, as soon as you get the diagnosis, you have all these thoughts in your head about how you're going to do this and how you're going to do that. But taking it one day at a time and just taking a deep breath, waiting for the plan. And then it's the same as what you said before about not making any rash decisions when you're done with treatment. Don't be making any rash decisions when you get your first diagnosis. Kind of just let it settle in, let the universe guide you a little bit too, and take control of what you can and do what you can with what you can.
Yeah. I mean, and don't forget, you do have a little bit of control. I mean, I think that's the thing for a lot of us, right? You feel so spirally out of control. You're on the calls with the insurance companies and you're trying to get in to see doctors or whatever. You're trying to book an appointment. remember, your little modicum of control is to try to see if you can get a second opinion so you feel a little bit of control over who's taking care of you. You
Yeah.
may have been diagnosed at your local hospital. Maybe it's worth it to drive into Boston and, get a second opinion. Why not? You may choose not to keep coming back to Boston, but isn't it worth a day to just meet and just hear what they have to say? And then I think, too, if there's something that's really important to you, like say you're diagnosed in December and in June you want to be at your best friend's kid's wedding or something like that, or it's first communion or whatever it is that's in your life, tell them and see if you can work around it. I think you shouldn't, if there's an opportunity to do something and you can do it, go for it. Right?
I love
and
that.
It's not always possible. The only day the surgeon's in might be this day, and you're going to have to miss, you do miss things, right? You're going to miss things. But try to say, if something's really important, to speak up, because I think a lot of the doctors and nurses will work with you, and the nurses are key.
Yeah.
They're the ones you really need to spend time with, to get to know and to recognize that they really make a huge difference in the kind of care you get. The nurses are amazing.
I love this. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you spending some time talking to me. Thank you for being such an inspiration and being so open with your story. I know you've helped a lot of people aside from just me, and you taking the time to just talk to me, it really made my day. And I know all of the listeners feel it as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And wishing you the best. 2025, better health.
My year.
Yep. Right. It's going to be better than ever.
Better than ever. Thank you so much, Kelley.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today on Chemo Coffee Talk. I hope this conversation left you feeling inspired, uplifted, and a little more connected. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with someone who might need it, and leave a review. It helps me reach more people looking for hope and resilience. And remember, no matter what you're facing, you're never alone. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep moving forward.